Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray. Today, I'm going to be attempting to answer a question from Andy. So thanks for your question, Andy. You, of course, can ask us a question too, along with all of our other askers, and you can back us on Patreon. One of three levels, you can get a copy of the magazine even if you want, which, of course, could lead to more questions, because we generally find that our research into ancient warfare brings up more questions than it answers. And even though we can often write and talk like we are definitively answering a question, most of the time we don't know, or we think we know, but generally quite open to be convinced otherwise. That's just the way it is with an ancient historian. Now, Andy's question is a tricky one. Having listened to the History Hit Medieval podcast, the term assassin doesn't turn up to the post-Crusades. My understanding is that there were plenty of assassinations before this. What terms did the Romans use? Were these people specifically trained in assassination? Now, this is fascinating because, yes, indeed, there were many, many assassinations in both Greek and Roman history and Byzantine history and, Ptolemaic history, well before the Crusades, not even Roman. And the funny thing, of course, is that the assassins tend not to be trained assassins. The assassins tend to be either people who are later painted as liberators, political visionaries, and in those cases, whether it be in ancient Athenian or later Roman ideas, they're generally talking about getting rid of tyrants. And so Harmodius and Aristogeiton, which looks to be a lover's feud, ends up being painted as a political visionary. We're going to free the world from tyranny. And that happens throughout Greek and Roman history. Caesar is assassinated by his colleagues, who are generally going to have had some kind of military training, and they all have their pugios with them, their daggers, and they stab him. They're not assassins. They are assassins because they do an assassination, but they're not trained assassins in that sense. And what you find from most assassinations in Greek and Roman history is they're done by soldiers or slaves or, wrestling comrades or gladiatorial comrades. So they're people who are trained in the use of weapons, but they are not assassins as the sense of that's their job. And so there's terms for assassination, which generally are also coinciding with words for murder, or committing a horrible act, homicidia, ocidia, things like that. If you look for the etymology, you'll find caedus and homicida, dolores stimulantes, and stuff like that, which are all kind of words about killing, not necessarily about assassins. You do get assassinatus or assassinanus later, which reading up for this is fascinating because it says that it's possibly linked to a corruption of the Arabic word for a hashish eater, implying, some kind of dollar getting ready to do the act. We do have Sicarius as a murderer or a killer, and of course there are Sicari in the names of unit types normally associated with some kind of zealot. So you've got the assassinations in ancient Greek and Roman history as murder, politically justified murder, generally speaking. You also have the idea that if you had particular kinds of acts, which would be assassinations or morally questionable acts, you could choose someone who was morally questionable to do those acts for you. And there's several examples of those kinds of people in ancient warfare. Fascinatingly, the Cretans under Alexander seem to be given a role to either kill somebody or torture them quite specifically. Why them? Is it about their training, or is it about the fact that they're paid and will do anything you ask, which again comes down to the mercenary nature of certain types of troops. And again, later assassinations tend to seem to be quite mercenary in the sense that they are loyal troops performing assassinations on behalf of someone. So there are assassinations, but there are not assassins. Now, that, of course, becomes complicated because there's a whole bunch, and actually there's a brand new book only out this month, or last month, about that. And that is, of course, Stephen Elliott's book on Roman special forces and special ops, which looks at the speculatores, exploratores, protectores, and Ariani in the service of Rome. And so what you've got there, the Ariani are a very obscure unit of the late Roman army. Whether they exist earlier is hard to know. Whether they are, in fact, speculatores or exploratores who seem to be some kind of scout is tricky, but it seems to be that they are some kind of scout. But there's another inscription to a milites arcanu. Now, arcanu arcanus, which is sometimes linked to the Ariani, the arcani, is the secret ones. Now, that is sometimes interpreted as the secret ones, meaning some kind of secret force, much like the Spartan force, the Cryptiae, the sort of, secret force that goes around killing helots in the case of the Spartans, which again only comes from Plutarch. Is it just a picture in the sources to create this mystery? The Arcanu, of course, the secret ones could simply be a brotherhood, a religious brotherhood, or a society that they've joined. There are lots of secret religious societies that we have in the ancient sources, which are not doing anything in their role as soldiers particularly secret. The problem is we have this single inscription from Vindelander, which gives us no sense of what this person actually did, but just tells us that's how they identified. But it could easily be that they're a secret one, meaning they're one of us, and that the tomb or the inscription is to them by their brothers. So it doesn't really help. Normally, of course, they would say frati to tell us that they're their brothers. But anyway, we've got this idea that there are these troops who do things. And the fascinating thing about that is they aren't necessarily doing those things exclusively. They generally, like the speculatores and exploratores, they are soldiers who do these roles, but then they would return and they would fight as soldiers. Perhaps the best example is actually Ammianus Marcellinus himself, who is a protectores domestici or domesticus for his commander Urbinicus in 359. But he's sent with a single centurion, so there's two of them. They're sent well ahead to spy on what the Sasanian Persians are doing, crossing the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So he basically is scouting and then sneaking around the territory. But he gets back to his unit and then fights as a regular guard cavalryman. And so I think the interesting thing about that is that his role as a scout and as a sneaker, makes him sound like a character from Dungeons and Dragons, is in addition to his fighting rather than in place of it. So these are people who had skills and would do tasks, but that wouldn't supersede what they were actually meant to do as soldiers. And so this idea of trained bands of assassins or trained bands of something else is a bit misleading. At the same time, of course, we do have units which are named for being archers or slingers or, different types of heavy cavalry or cavalry. And probably when they begin, though, their careers, that's exactly what they do. But by the end of their career, we're not really sure that that is, in fact, the role that they're undertaking. Much the same as with the units that we've talked about before that come from a particular geographical place. Are they still from that geographical place? Like, again, at the end of the Roman Empire, we find groups of units named at the Battle of Adrianople, for instance, as scutari, shield men, which is kind of pointless because all men are shield men. Surely they all carry shields. Does that imply a particular kind of shield? Does it imply a particular origin of that unit? The Lanciari, they're the lancers, but aren't they all carrying lances? Is this something else? Are they bodyguards of some kind? We don't know. The Mattiari, is it a Mattiarius, which is a kind of a matic, or is it just a word by that face? So I think there are not assassins as such. There are people who assassinate, whether it be a crime of passion or a politically motivated one or killing a tyrant, however, but there are not units of assassins. I think that's a misunderstanding and a possibly a deliberate one in some cases. Chances are we have people who do assassinations perform assassinations, perhaps even accidentally, and then try and justify it later. There are not units of assassins roaming around under the Greek or Roman worlds, even though sometimes our sources seem to be painting this picture of secret societies wandering around performing assassinations. I think that's a literary figment. But anyway, I hope I've answered that question, and I look forward to seeing you again on Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks very much. Bye.